continue our series called Weights, and we don't want to be like that guy. We don't want to be carrying these weights around with us. And these weights that we're talking about, we're using this as a metaphor for weights of insecurities that we all carry around with us. I've never met a person who has been completely free from insecurities. We all have them. We grow up with them. And basically what happens is we have two great needs. Whoa. Hello. Now it's on. We have two great needs in our life that we are always striving to fulfill. And these are your fill in the blanks as well. One is the need for love or security. The other is the need for value or significance. We all want to feel loved. It's a driving force within our lives. And we all want to feel like our life matters, that we matter to someone and that our life counts. And these are the things that drive us. And God put these things inside of us. You say, God, why would you do this? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But because of this, we are constantly looking to fulfill these needs. And the problem is we have to get them from humans that are flawed and weak. Dr. Carl Rogers, who's a psychologist, years ago coined this phrase. He said what we're looking for is unconditional positive regard. And he came up with this phrase to mostly describe clinical settings. So if you're a counselor and you're working with a patient and they tell you that they've just committed murder or molested somebody or something, you don't immediately judge them and go, you're evil, get out of here. Because that way you couldn't help the person. So what you have to do is you have to have unconditional positive regard in that setting. You've got to look past what they've done wrong in order to love them and help them, or not necessarily to love them in a clinical setting, but to at least understand and try to get to the root of what's happening without judging them and just shutting yourself down. But Rogers said we also, in all of life, this is what we all want. We all want unconditional, positive regard. Somebody who will love us completely and never judge us and always be positive toward us no matter what we do. How many have a dozen people like that in your life? I would dare say that few of us have anyone in our lives that can give us that. Well, here's one of the reasons why. The people that might give you that, you don't open your life to. Think about it. My grandma gave me unconditional positive regard. You think I told my grandmother everything about my life? No way. Why? Because if she knew, I probably wouldn't get positive regard anymore. See? So we're striving for something that's almost impossible to get. And as a result, it leads to two behaviors. Now, Scott talked about the first behavior a couple weeks ago when he talked about this performance trap. And performance is basically this result of being insecure where we have to meet certain expectations or standards in order to feel good about ourselves. This is the person who always has to succeed, always comparing themselves to others, always comparing what they make or how big a house they have or who's prettier or who's thinner, all that kind of stuff. And they get caught up in whether or not their success is compared to other people, whether they're being successful or not. This carries with this inherent fear of failure. The thought that if I mess up, I'm unworthy of love. If I'm not good enough, I'm not significant. So these people drive themselves crazy trying to go from victory to victory to victory. And it might be at school, it might be in a relationship, it might be at work, whatever it might be, that they set this standard that they have to constantly meet. And a lot of times they set standards for other people too. And what it does, it puts an unhealthy weight on themselves because nobody can be perfect all the time. So if you live in this trap, you are constantly beating yourself up because you're never good enough. The fear of failure can really rule your life. It'll cause you to not take risks, to not be open to people, and so on. Now, what we're going to talk today about is an alternative weight that we carry, another area of insecurity, and I believe this one is even broader and affects all of us to a certain degree. And that is the weight of approval, where performance is all about putting the weight on myself. Approval puts the weight on other people. It says I must be approved by certain others in order to feel good about myself. And that carries with it a fear of rejection. So between the fear of failure and the fear of rejection, these things dominate a lot of people's lives. And I think they influence all of us to a certain degree. We all want to be loved. We want to be accepted. And if we think someone might not accept us, might not love us back, then we're reluctant to open our lives up. I must be approved by certain others in order to feel good about myself. Now, you got your test. Hopefully you did your test. If you get bored of the message, you can do your test. And hopefully right at the end, you'll say, "Ooh, I need some of that." And so you'll join with me. I find that this test, people score the worst on. They have the highest scores on this test. And what's interesting is we're not aware of how much we're affected. And I think I put the scores in there. I'll put them up here. But we don't realize how much our lives are affected by our need for other people's approval. This was the biggest area in my life that I've had to overcome and battle in insecurity in my own lives. And there were a lot of reasons for it. When we start out, we get all the unconditional positive regard we can stand, don't we? Because we have parents and other people. Just all we have to do is cry. And they just, "What do you need?" And they're right there. And they're telling us we're cute and wonderful and everything's great. And then we go to school, go to the playground, and we realize, whoa, people aren't nice. They're not giving me the love. They don't value me as much as my parents did. And we start to all of a sudden then feel bad about ourselves, and we begin to seek that out in other people. And we depend on others to affirm our self-worth. And that's a tough place to live, because you are keeping your value in the hands of someone who is an imperfect human being. So we come up with this formula that we live by. And this formula says, for me to value myself, it depends on how good I do, how successful I am, and what other people think of me. And so to stay in a place or try to strive to be in a place, and we fail to impress others, we fail to set the standards or to live by the standards we set for ourselves. So because we fall into this trap of failure and rejection, we just pull back many times and isolate ourselves. So that way we don't have to risk someone rejecting us. Now, what has come along to save us in the last 10 years? Social media. If I can get enough likes and enough followers, I can be happy. Because those are really deep relationships, aren't they? It basically says, this is all I'm giving you, and this is all you have to give me. It's not costing you anything. It's not costing me anything. But we're going to tell ourselves we're happy and have lots of friends. See? And we're just going to hear the happy things that happen in their lives, and we're just going to share the happy stuff that happens in our life, and we're all going to be happy inside, right? But when a crisis comes, and you can always tell, people start emoting on Facebook. Not a good place. Some people will be encouraging, but some people will be honest. And so when we have these views of ourselves, and because we carry these insecurities, we start to have certain attitudes. You see them in the test, but also things like you see young people, they only want to be seen with people that are popular. Or they'll avoid people that they think may reject them. Or maybe you start out this way, but I know a lot of adults like this. You'll exaggerate about your accomplishments and experiences in order to impress people. You're concerned about how you look and fitting in. I love the old expression, we buy things we don't need and can't afford to impress people we don't want to be like. Or so we say. We do things that we don't feel comfortable doing because the fear of exclusion or rejection from other people. We avoid any kind of disagreement because we need to be liked. And I don't have time, I've told my story before, but the reason why this relates so much to my life is I grew up without that kind of security and value that comes from parents. I wasn't close to my parents at all. And I mentioned that a few weeks ago. My dad never told me he loved me. Well, one time on his deathbed. And because of that, I was always pursuing his approval. As I moved out of the house, I just started projecting that on other people. So whenever I'd be in a social setting, I'd figure out who the most important person was and try to get close to them. Or in a job, I would be driven to serve my boss because I was projecting a father's acceptance on him. And if I had that boss's acceptance, it was kind of like having my dad's acceptance. But it was never fulfilling enough. So you'd have this success and then wait for the next one. For me, I actually carried this into ministry. I was in ministry 10 years before God really was able to confront this in me and change me. Because I just took this drivenness into ministry, and now I had a purpose. I'm doing this for God. So I'm going to do this event, and if it's successful and a lot of people come, and people come to Christ and things like that, then that's a great thing, and I would feel so good, and people pat me on the back and say, you're awesome, and we appreciate your gift and how much you get done and everything, even though you left a trail of bodies. We're not looking at that. But, you got it done, way to go. And then I'd go, yay. Whew, I'm exhausted. But next morning, get up and what have I got to do now? Because I've got to do the next thing to get that approval. One day, senior pastor I served came to me and said one statement that changed my life. He said this. He said, Tony, I just want to let you know that I appreciate you, and not just for your gifting or for your work. Now would maybe seem insignificant to other people. That statement was what I was wanting to hear my entire life. That someone loved me, not for what I could do for them or for God or something else, but that God or that this person loved me. Now, I knew that God loved me up here. I just didn't know it here. I didn't really believe it. It didn't influence my life to the degree where it ruled in my life. There are still too many lies swimming around that it's about my performance, that it's about earning God's approval. Every time I'd fail, I felt like I had to go back to God, and God, I've fallen again. And I was raised in a church where it was popular to backslide. Every sin, you're backsliding. So that's why you had Sunday night service for all the backsliders to come to church so that they could feel good enough about themselves to go to work on Monday. And then they'd send Monday afternoon and stew in it all week until next Sunday, Bad theology. That changed my life, though. And I love what Hosea said. In the Old Testament, the prophet Hosea said this. He said, God drew us with cords of human kindness. And that's what my pastor did for me. When he made that statement, it was a cord of human kindness that drew me to himself and drew me to God. And I suddenly, because I had that acceptance in this person I saw as a spiritual father, in that moment, I suddenly understood the love of God, my Heavenly Father. And when I got that, I didn't have to look back. See, here's one of the issues in life that I think that is a truth that we wrestle with. Dr. Charles Cooley, kind of a father of modern sociology, came up with a theory called the looking glass self-image theory. And looking glass self-image theory goes something like this. we base our self-worth on what we think the most important person in our life at this moment thinks of us. Let me say that again. We believe at our core that our self-worth is tied to what the most important person in our life thinks about us. Now that works out great, as I mentioned, when you're a child. Because mommy and daddy love you. I'm special. My mom and dad think I'm special. So you're pretty secure. Now little kids that don't get that, they grow up to be a mess. And they grow up like us as parents with insecurities. And then they just pass it on. Imagine that 14-year-old girl that falls in love with that 17-year-old boy. Who is in charge of her self-worth now? Not mom and dad, but that 17-year-old boy. Now, he's not emotionally mature enough to tie his own shoes. He can't even care for a puppy. But now he's responsible for the self-worth of this young girl. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And we see the girl, she starts dating, she updates her status, and I'm in a relationship. And it's wonderful, and she's dreaming of the future, and he's just thinking about cars or something, And suddenly, one day, he just loses interest and goes on or sees something better. So what happens to that girl's self-esteem or self-worth? Yeah, it just tanks. Why? Because she was trying to get from someone else, an immature someone else, what she didn't have. I'll say this, and it's just true. Fathers, especially with your daughters, give them unconditional positive regard. Give them unconditional love. Let them know that they are special, that they are a princess, that they are precious in your sight. Even though you have to discipline them, even though they disappoint you, always leave that door open so that at their core they know they can always come home. They always have a parent that loves them. See, to me, it's not cute when a 7 or 8-year-old little girl says, "Ooh, I like a boyfriend. I need a boyfriend." What she is signaling is, I'm not getting something from home. I'm not made to feel secure enough at home, so therefore I'm looking for it someplace else. She doesn't realize that, and parents that think it's cute, I would just say that if you're in the midst of that, immediately turn up the love. And you can change that in a moment. You can make that little girl feel special, and sons too. I love what the Father said about Jesus. Here Jesus is beginning his ministry, and the first thing he does is he gets baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. As he's coming up out of the water, God speaks from heaven, and he says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Now, Jesus hadn't done anything yet. No water to wine, no healings, no people raised from the dead, no demons cast out, no feeding 5,000, nothing. Jesus has done nothing at this point. And that's why I think it's so significant that before he begins his ministry, the Father says, I love you. I'm pleased with him. Not because of what he's done, but just because he's my son. And here's the challenge. We always say that people that we love the most hurt us the most. We're always hurt by the people we love the most. That's because we risk more with them. We open our life more to them. And that's going to happen. We have to risk loving. And we have to risk rejection and pain. But sometimes we depend so much on someone else to maintain our self-worth that it's a burden that they just can't carry. I'm not talking about just 17-year-old boys. I'm talking about adults that just cannot carry they can't be responsible for all of your self-esteem. You have to be able to get that somewhere else. Now, I've talked a lot about psychologists and sociologists today, and I know some of you are going, when's it going to get to the Bible? Well, I've taken a long time with this introduction because I believe psychologists and sociologists are good at identifying the problem. The challenges in our society is they don't have answers. Their best attempts to help us with these kind of issues are to either medicate us or keep us in therapy for our lives. Now, for those of you that are taking medication because of emotional issues, mental emotional issues, or in therapy, stay with it. But I've got some really good news for you today. I believe that if you'll apply what I'm going to share in just a minute, this can help you gain freedom and fight this battle from a whole nother angle that I have watched change people's lives. And I know this to be true because it radically changed mine. Here's the good news for people like me that were addicted to approval. God's answer is what we call reconciliation. What do I mean by that? It means God is not mad at you anymore. Look at Colossians chapter 1. At one time, you were separated from God. You were his enemies in your mind, and the evil things you did were against God. But now God has made you his friends again. He did this through Christ's death in his body so that he might bring you into God's presence as a people who are holy, with no wrong, and with nothing of which God can judge you as guilty. Now, this is so hard for us to embrace. We file it away in the corner of our brain under religion because it just doesn't seem real. It just doesn't. It's too good to be true. Because every other relationship and encounter we have in life says there's an exchange. If I'm good to you, you'll be good to me. If I'm bad to you, I have to grovel and repent, or else you won't accept me. And so we project that on God. So we mess up, like I said earlier, and then we feel like I've got to punish myself. I've got to beat myself up. I've got to grovel. I've got to show God I'm really sorry. See anybody else ever do that? I don't do it anymore, but I used to really catch myself a lot doing that. I've just got to be sorrier before I go to God. You know? It's like if I punish myself, he'll know how righteous I am. Yes, God, I messed up. Oh boy, am I aware I messed up. I'm going to punish myself for a while so you don't have to. Well, it kind of puts you in charge of everything, doesn't it? I've determined when I've groveled enough. Now I think I'm ready to be accepted by God. Well, that's called self-righteousness, and God's not impressed by that. When we mess up, we go to God, and here's the crazy thing that's hard for people to embrace. We say, God, forgive me. Oh, God, I've messed up. You've got to forgive me. And he says, I already have. But no, I mean now, for this one, not when I did it yesterday. When I did that bad thing again today, I need your forgiveness. He said, yeah, it's already been forgiven. 2,000 years ago on a cross, all the sins you've committed in your past, that you're committing right now, or will forever commit, were nailed to the cross. Now, that is so hard to embrace. Paul even said that. Well, then what am I going to do? Just go on and sin that grace may abound? He said, well, no, because we love God. But I have a whole new nature now. I'm a new creation inside. And because I'm a new creation and a new person, I still have to renew my mind. I still think like I used to. I still get drawn by stuff that I shouldn't be drawn to, but I am. And when I do, God forgives me. I'm already forgiven. And if we can have that at the forefront of our thinking, we won't allow sin to separate us from God. Because we are not our sin. That's not who we are. We are the righteousness of God in Christ, but we mess up. When your child messes up, you don't throw them out of the family. Oh, you've messed up. You're out of the family. They keep your name. And you love them. And you keep the door open. And you always invite them into unconditional love. Now notice we don't do anything to earn this. It's something that Jesus did. So now, because of that, instead of my worth being my performance and others' opinion, there's a whole new equation I live by. It's this: Jesus' performance on the cross and God's opinions now are what shape my self-worth. And these things cannot be shaken. See, it was under the Old Testament that people, whenever they sinned, the Bible said without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. So when you sinned, it cost the life of something. A pigeon, a lamb, whatever it might be. Yeah, this is not real popular with PETA. But the point is, why would God do something so gross? Why would he require some innocent animal to die for me? Because he was trying to show people that there's a cost to sin, and God takes it seriously. But then God paid the ultimate price. He sends his own Son to shed his blood in such a pure and perfect offering that it took care of sin for all time. John the Baptist, when he saw Jesus coming, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." Not just your good people's sins, but those bad people on TV, their sins too. Not your good sins, your righteous sins, because you're a pretty good person, aren't you? But those bad people's sins, he loves them just as much. Now, this is important because God makes us right in his sight. And because I'm secure in God's love, and because I know the love of God, and it's been ingrained into my life, and I know that Jesus' sacrifice paid for my sins, and I don't have to grovel before God. I am constantly welcome into his presence, even though I mess up, even though I fail at times, even though I don't feel like I have God's approval. Down inside, I know that I do. I've renewed my mind to think this way. And the wonderful thing is, when I don't need your approval, and I don't need to impress you, I can be myself, and I can focus on you instead of me. And that's what God is looking for. He's wanting a people, a church, that understands the grace of God, that understands what Jesus has paid for us, that are people that are secure, that are confident, so that when they go out in the world and interact with people that are unkind and unloving, they don't step back out of fear, but instead they go, "I know you must be having a bad day. And I just want you to know, I'm going to love you anyway because I see your value. I see what God can do in your life, regardless of how you're acting right now." Parents, good message again for kids. Let me tell you how this worked in my life one time in particular. As a chaplain for the fire department, I serve in that role. I get called in worst moments in people's lives. I get called when there's a fire, accident, homicide, death. This week I was called to a home Thursday night, I think, late. A lady had passed away. Our fire team, our medics, worked her for 30 minutes. And I arrived right as they were finished working her and just couldn't bring her back. And they all move back and say, "Chap, it's up to you." So I have to go in and sit down with her husband, her kids and grandkids, and tell them that this important woman in their life has died. And I know that's going to change their lives forever. And so, that's challenging, but I don't mind doing it because I think it's really a sacred honor to be there and to love people well in that situation. A couple years ago, the situation was a little different. Now, when I get a call, I'm just given an address. I arrive on scene, and when I get out of my car, from the time I leave my car till I get to the doors, probably 10 or 15 seconds. During that time, I am briefed by either the police or the fire crew as to what is going on, why I'm there, and who I have to reach out to. So it's like boom, 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 boom. I'm getting this information, and then I walk in, and everybody backs up and expects me to, do my thing. I arrive on this scene just a few blocks from here, and I see two medics stand out by the medic truck, and they're just angry. One's kind of teary-eyed. I go up to the door. I see two police officers that are clearly just agitated. They're upset. And I talk to the lieutenant on scene, and he says, this is the situation. We got a mom inside, still hungover. We think she rolled over at night and smothered her baby. The medics have tried to work the baby, bring it back, but we're unsuccessful. The mom's inside. So, one thing that I discovered years ago, I heard a chaplain in a training say this. He said, in every scene you show up to, you bring yourself. And that's true. You bring all your prejudices, your ideas, your own insecurities, your faith, or maybe lack thereof. Just like you